My name is Joseph Mujere. I'm a lecturer in the Department of History here at the University of York. I joined the department in September 2022.
So I'm just going to ask you a series of questions, basically, and you just have to answer them to the best of your ability. None of them are going to be hard. What work do you do?
I'm a social and environmental historian. So I teach mostly courses on environmental history, modules and courses on environmental history. I also teach history of sexuality in Africa. I'm also interested in oral history, so I also teach oral history.
What made you interested in the subject to begin with?
The first thing is mining is huge in Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe is well endowed when it comes to mineral resources. So I grew up seeing lots of people engaging in mining, especially gold mining. But I was also aware of other kinds of resource extraction activities like coal mining, platinum mining, chromite mining, tin, copper, etc. So I grew up seeing all these extractive activities happening. So it drew me deeper into trying to get a sense of the effects of resource extraction on the local communities.
Can you tell me your career up until this point, roughly?
I began my career at the University of Zimbabwe, where I did a Bachelor of Arts in Archaeology and History. I really wanted to become an archaeologist, really. I had these huge ambitions of becoming an archaeologist. But unfortunately, things didn't work out. Then I did a master's in African history at the University of Zimbabwe. And thereafter, I got a scholarship to pursue my doctoral studies in history at the University of Edinburgh. For my PhD research, I was largely looking at land and the politics of belonging in Southern Africa. After completing my PhD, I then decided to combine my, expertise in researching about land and politics of belonging with trying to understand resource extraction. I did my first postdoctoral fellowship at the University of the Witwatersrand in Johannesburg, but my own research was looking at everyday life in informal settlements that have emerged on the margins of platinum and chromite mines in Rustenburg. I was using a lot of oral history to interview these residents, record their stories, which led to my first documentary film, which is titled Waiting in a Platinum City.
What is your research about?
So my research is on what I would term social and environmental history of resource extraction. So to be more specific, I do research on platinum and chromite mining. Currently, I'm doing research on chromite mining in Zimbabwe, specifically on the working lives of artisanal and small-scale chromite miners, mining cooperatives, etc. So I try to understand how they try to make a living out of resource extraction, and of course, the effects of their activities on the environment.
How does mineral extraction work?
Mineral extraction in Africa is largely dominated by transnational corporations, and some of these transnational corporations have been controlling mining claims since colonial times. But more recently, governments have been trying to work around that challenge to, engage these transnational corporations to release some of the claims to allow local actors, be they independent miners, be they artisanal and small-scale miners, to get access to those claims. Most of the African countries, they do not have the capacity to process the minerals or to beneficiate, which would create more local jobs and more value. And at the end of the day, they tend to export the minerals raw, which tends to benefit the transnational corporations.
So what is the problem that your research tries to look at?
My research tries to look at the experiences of local actors, mostly artisanal and small-scale miners that try to make a living out of resource extraction. So I try to examine their relationship with the transnational corporations and their struggles over access to mining claims. I also explore how these local actors, artisanal and small-scale miners, over time devise strategies of extracting the resources.
How do you go about investigating extractive mining processes?
To begin with, I do try to research in government records. Specific government departments keep records of mining activities, and I try to read those government documents. Unfortunately, they tend to give you the official narrative of resource extraction. I also use contemporary newspaper reports. I also try to use Kanban records, which are very difficult to get hold of. But in most of the cases, I interview artisanal and small-scale miners themselves and get to understand their experiences from their own point of view, rather than getting it from, say, a government document. I also use photography, both as a source of history and also as a method of getting historical data about mining activities. But sometimes I ask my research participants to take photographs of their daily activities, and then they would help me interpret those photographs. Sometimes they will caption those photographs so that, again, I get to understand their experiences from their own perspective. I get to ask them, why did you take this photograph? What does this really represent? What does this mean for you? Things like that, which, again, helps me get to understand their experiences from their perspective.
How does an artisanal miner sell their mined minerals?
Usually, artisanal miners, they sell their produce to middlemen who obviously exploit them, and then the middlemen who then sell to the big mining companies. But to be more specific, when you're talking about artisanal and small-scale chromite mining, there are two types of artisanal and small-scale chromite miners. The first one would be a miner who gets into a contract with a large-scale chromite miner, where they would mine on a claim owned by that miner, by that huge company, and then they would sell the produce to that company. And in Zimbabwe, they are called tribute mining agreements. But then you also get cases whereby an artisanal miner does not have access to a legal claim, and then they can mine illegally. And when they do that, usually they sell to middlemen.
But who sets the price?
Unfortunately, these mining arrangements tend to favor the large-scale mining companies that own the claims. And usually they are the ones that set the prices, and then they also determine the quality of the ore and the price. But in the 80s and the 90s, there was a government parastatal that was established to mediate the relationship between these artisanal miners and mining cooperatives and mining companies, and they would negotiate the prices on behalf of the mining cooperatives and independent artisanal miners.
What projects are you currently working on?
Currently, I'm finalizing a 3.5 year project on the social and environmental effects of artisanal and small-scale chromite mining in Zimbabwe, which was funded by the Volkswagen Foundation. So the project really looked at how local miners, artisanal and small-scale mining cooperatives, how they organize themselves to get access to mining claims and to extract chromite, which they then would sell to transnational corporations, such as in Zimbabwe, Zim Alloys and Zimasco, which were formerly owned by Union Carbide and Anglo American. So I tried to explore the relationship between these local actors and the transnational corporations and their everyday struggles over access to mining claims and over access to, markets, as well as issues around fair prices and the environmental effects of mining.
Where do you see your research being used in the future?
My hope really is that my research could be used by governments and policy makers to try to devise policies that help local communities fight against exploitative resource extraction, and also that help local communities understand the negative effects of resource extraction and help them extract the resource more sustainably.
Where can people access your work?
Most of my publications are available on Google Scholar, but when it comes to my visual work, my first documentary film is available on Vimeo, waiting in a platinum city. I'm working on my second documentary film on artisanal and small-scale chromite mining in Zimbabwe, and I'm hoping it should be out by January or February next year.
How much work do you do across the departments?
I must admit, currently I haven't been doing justice to that side of my work. I haven't been able to do a lot of work beyond my department, but I'm very keen to work with colleagues from geography and environmental science, as well as people from geology. I've started really slowly building up towards my next big project, which is going to be on coal mining. But because the focus of that project is going to largely focus on the subterranean and miners' engagement with geological matter, issues to do with coal dust, issues to do with coal seam fires, I really think that I would benefit a lot if I work with people from geography and environmental science, as well as people from geology.
What's the next stage for you?
In terms of my research, I'm working on a book proposal at the moment, trying to produce a monograph based on my 4 or 5 years of research on chromite mining in Zimbabwe. I'm also working with a graphic artist trying to produce comics or a complete comic strip based on the oral interviews that I conducted with artisanal and small-scale miners in Zimbabwe.
If you could start all over again, what advice would you give yourself?
If I would start all over again, perhaps the best advice that I would give myself would be to try to do interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary research much earlier than when I started doing it. Because I think I started doing inter and transdisciplinary research a bit late. I think after I finished my PhD, that's when I began to think about how I could work with artists, for instance, and how I could work with filmmakers, and also how I could collaborate with people from geology, mining engineering, to do research on resource extraction. So in conclusion, I would say I started off thinking I would become either an archaeologist or a traditional historian who would use archives to reconstruct people's experiences. But over the last 10 or so years, I've learned that I could take this a bit further and collaborate with artists, collaborate with scholars in other disciplines such as geology, mining, engineering, environmental science, to enrich my understanding of the world of resource extraction and of African experiences with resource extraction. It has been really a great pleasure talking to you. Thank you. Bye.